Moshe?
Moshe.
Moshe. Okay, swing and miss. Have we met before, by the way? Who knows?
Did he cut out, or is he just frozen?
I think he's frozen because we can still hear each other. Oh, you're back. Yeah, can you hear us okay?
The video's down.
Maybe. Yeah, let me see if I turn my camera off. Luke, do you want to turn yours off as well? It's likely that we'll need to do that.
Figure out. There it is. Cool.
Nice.
I was bummed that I missed out on the first call. I watched the recording yesterday. With a lot of good discussion.
Yeah, it was definitely a good call. And I think we'll try to build off of some of that today, and also go deeper on and try like new kinds of a new kind of strategy in terms of the order that we do things. Hello, Moshe. Is it so sorry? I already forgot. Is it Moshe?
It's Moshe.
Moshe. Is that right?
Moshe.
Okay. Moshe, got it. Sweet. Do you want to turn off your video, Moshe?
Yeah, I think it's causing problems.
Yeah, just in case. Hello, Dimi.
Hi, guys. Hello.
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 Hi, Rice.
Welcome. So let's wait for maybe one more minute as people kind of get in here. And just to make sure everybody, we got the that everybody has. I'm putting it in the side here. There's the Curation Markets lobby. Simon and I want to change the name away from Curation Markets to Cryptoeconomic Primitives, but we might not be able to. And then in there's this this Cryptoeconomic Primitive Circle, the actual Trello board. And hello, Doug. And then I'll also be taking notes on this Google Doc. So that's how you can just see what's on my mind, what I'm typing in from what people are talking about. So let's kind of get things rock and rolling here. And as we and we'll kind of more people come in and out over time or not. So we did an initial experiment to one of these calls yesterday, and at a high level, the goal here is this is part of this new ETH Commons co-op initiative, with the macro goal of that being we're at the place of exponential converging technologies, and those things will affect society in some big ways, and we want to make sure that as those things affect us, that they're affecting us in a positive way. And in order to do that, we need to do things like make sure we're thinking about the commons and internalize externalities and have skin in the game and stuff like that. So this is part of that, and this is kind of a cross-project thing where people from projects around the ecosystem can come in and talk about their shared goals and challenges around cryptoeconomic primitives like token curated registries and curation markets. So with that as a high-level overview, what we're going to do today is I think I'd love to start with essentially chatting with people, doing a quick little intro for who people are, and then after we do the intro, then we'll kind of dive into the Trello board and kind of up prioritize the things that we want to talk about. So with that, let's start with Moshe, whose name I now get. Moshe, can you give us a quick introduction on yourself and how you relate to cryptoeconomic primitives?
Yeah, so I'm a medical doctor and got into crypto in 2014 and have started a project of my own called Med Credits. And essentially it's supposed to be a network of physicians who can offer their services and do what physicians do. And we're using a TCR to essentially onboard physicians globally into this network.
Cool. Thanks for that. Luke, can you give an intro?
Sure. My name is Luke Duncan. I'm currently the research lead at Aragon, kind of working on decentralized governance and kind of tokenization in general. I'm very interested in what got me into the Ethereum space in the first place is the social impact that these kind of fundamental changes in the way we look at economics and incentives will have on kind of society in general.
Cool. And let's go to Doug.
So my name is Doug King. I'm CTO and co-founder of Verity, and we've been working on a general purpose reputation system that encapsulates the values of a community. And I'm very interested in any kind of governance and reputation systems, including token curated registries and any other variants like that, prediction markets, et cetera. I'm trying to figure out how to best create incentives that enhance society going forward.
A society. Also, I know Matt, you're a co-founder. Dimi, do you want to go?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Dimi, I started in 2013 with Ascribe, which was about ownership for intellectual property for creators and artists. We moved on to BigchainDB and the Interplanetary Database, a database for the commons, fully decentralized, tried to do that. Now we're in a project called Ocean Protocol, which is more about data services. I have a strong passion about basically decentralizing the reward function and resource pooling or utility pooling. So I do believe that these economic primitives can help us achieve common goals rather than individual goals. That's kind of my premise.
Cool. So I think we're pretty aligned here on trying to use this stuff for good. So that's good. So what we're going to do now is essentially, so yesterday there's this concept called lean coffee where we're essentially going to add to that Trello board in the thing that says circle number 2, we're going to add topics that we'd like to talk about, questions that we have, anything that's on your mind. We're going to spend a couple minutes just adding things there. And then after we add things there, we'll have a period where we get to vote. And then we'll vote on the things that we want to talk about. And those are the things that will be up prioritized. So that's essentially how this meeting is going to go. And then at the end, we'll do some kind of retrospectives and next steps. So with that, let's take about maybe 2 to 4 minutes and everybody can start on that Trello board. Let me actually make sure on that Trello board, essentially writing in here the things that you'd like to talk about today.
I forgot my Trello password. Damn.
If you type them in the side, I will add them to the board. Take maybe 1 more minute to keep writing things and do a mind dump. There are no wrong answers because we will vote on them later.
I just could have logged in with Google.
Okie dokie. So now let's go into voting mode and let's give everyone 3 votes. So you have 3 votes. Let's do 4 votes actually. You have 4 votes to distribute among the cards that are in that circle number 2. So vote away. Take 2 minutes to vote away. And Dimi, if you want to just like write. Okay, sweet. That's what.
How do we vote?
Sorry. Yep. Thank you. You vote with the V button. You press the V button on a given card, and then it says vote. Yep. And Dimi, is yours the Zen of data and curation of primitives, or are those 2 different ones?
let's call it the Zen of governance. Could be data governance, but I think we should make it more the Zen of the commons or something. I want to have this open thing. By the way, there. Let me see if I want to add something. Finally.
Take 30 more seconds to get your votes in.
Can you vote on your own?
Okay, well, you are allowed to vote on your own. Definitely allowed and maybe encouraged. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the top ones up to the top here. We got a lot of 5s and 4s, or 2 5s and 4s, and then a bunch of little 1s. So what we're going to do, and this is a little bit of feedback from yesterday, is in general with lean coffee, what you do is you put a time cap, like a 4-minute time cap on each card. What we're going to try to do, especially because everybody voted on defining cryptoeconomic primitives, we're going to spend more time on that one. Still, we're going to time cap it, but we're going to try to spend a little bit more time on the juicier topics and then less time on the less juicy ones. So with that, I'll start. And by the way, whoever wrote the card gives an intro to it, and then we'll begin with probably let's do an 8-minute timer on that card. So the first one here is defining cryptoeconomic primitives. And this was my card. The idea here is really, and we talked about this yesterday as well, is what should be defined as a cryptoeconomic primitive. We talked about token curated registries. We talk about curation markets. We occasionally put in things like prediction markets in here. If you want to, you can put a bunch of things at the protocol level in here, like proof of work, proof of stake, etc. So what are your guys' thoughts on how cryptoeconomic primitives should be defined?
So a few interesting approaches. For example, looking at the typical stack for TCP/IP and such. I forgot. Where you have basically you switch between application, functional, messaging. At least there should be some layering in this approach, so that you can create simple modules that are swappable, and things can be upgraded without too much of a hassle.
Yep.
But that's one approach. That's basically how people designed the internet. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think cryptoeconomic primitives could be defined in terms of economic primitives, which we all know pretty well, and there's plenty of information out there about economic primitives, such as bonding and insurance and those kind of things. I wonder how granular we want to get, and if a pattern language is like the next step up. For instance, pattern language might be something you define a token curated registry as a pattern language, and maybe it's built of some cryptoeconomic primitives. So I don't know where that slice is, where we make that decision to be how granular. But I think we can be guided by a lot of economic primitives that are out there, and and define them in terms of how we do them in crypto land.
Can you clarify a bit? Because would you say that game theoretic primitives are a subset or a superset of what you actually mean?
I think game theoretic descriptions are some aspect of economic activity, and I suppose you could define them. Yeah, that's an interesting question. We think of maybe economic primitives as something maybe older and it's been around longer and more intuitive. We understand what bonds and insurance and staking mean, but game theory is fairly new and not as universal and not as intuitive. But I think those are both good tools. So I agree, both of those are useful tools.
Doug, could you go a little bit deeper on what you mean by pattern language? I like the idea of I've thought about the cryptoeconomic primitives from the computer science perspective, where you have like computer science primitives. And I also think it's a great idea to say, hey, you have economic primitives, and like cryptoeconomic might be the combination of them. What do you mean by pattern language?
Pattern language is something that's pretty well known to software engineers, and it actually comes from the architectural world. And if you dig a little bit deeper, there's a really seminal book on pattern languages by, let's see, Christopher Alexander, I believe. And it lays out this kind of almost fractal design of cities and towns all the way down to the level of buildings and pathways and so on, and how these things can be named and combined into much more powerful constructs. And so software engineering world grabbed onto that and said, hey, we are architecting and engineering things that are combined of these things that we need to name and describe. And so pattern language gives a easy handle to a concept and then describes how it's normally used in practice. Maybe we aren't building any of these things that are used in practice yet, but a lot of them could be pulled from other areas. And some of these are well-known things already in cryptoeconomics. So you give it an easy to define handle that describes how this thing is used and how it can be combined maybe at a layer up.
So it is the thing that pattern language is the thing that is underneath both computer science patterns and design patterns like Game of Four stuff, and it could be underneath something like cryptoeconomic primitives or other economic primitives.
Exactly. Yeah. And if anybody else wants to jump in with a computer science background and refine that or argue with me, go for it.
Well, maybe a different background. I come from microelectronics. I did a lot of dynamical system design and analysis. And there we had two approaches. One was top-down, and the other one was bottom-up. Synthesis versus abstraction. So interestingly, there I would work a lot with behaviors, agents in the system that have a specific strategy, and then the macroeconomic view would then be the top level where you have groups of agents working together into something. Another approach that you might want to have a look at is biomimicking. I've done a lot on evolutionary algorithms, things like swarm optimization, some hive mind kind of thing, ant colony. So that's also a bit of the same thing, where every agent in the system has a behavior, and what you want to optimize is for the group behavior. So that's yet another viewpoint, I guess. But it's, of course, the behavior itself, how you describe it, can then be used in pattern languages. I think you're looking at design patterns, which is probably one good way forward. So I pass on the mic to someone else.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is I think I'm pretty much in alignment with everybody here. The way I sort of see cryptoeconomic primitives is like a set of blocks or tools in your toolbox. You may have some that are really low level, like Merkle trees, and you may have some that are like synthesis of lots of these smaller tools, like TCR, which can be broken up into many smaller blocks as well, like partial lock, commit, reveal voting, all of the stuff that it's built on in terms of like the underlying blockchain that's required for it to work. And defining these sort of blocks and tools in our toolbox allows us to more readily interface with each other and kind of take the knowledge that we've gained about one tool and combine it with something else to make more and more high-level abstractions that are interesting and have interesting properties.
Yeah, I like that. And just thinking from that stack, and this is similar to the layering approach, but the stack perspective. I really like Fred Esrum's piece on the Web 2 versus Web 3 stack and what that looks like, and then also the Aragon piece, I think, on the emergent Ethereum stack. And BigChainDB also has a piece on stacks. I love things on stacks, and that's from just like those are from like a project level. But I think that there's something that could be done here, especially and that's why something like Merkle trees, I agree, is a lower level thing that is just so often used within this space that just you should know about it, and then you can start using that to build up to these higher level primitives. But I think all of them are needed in order to start to define this set. Okay, so the time just ended. On the right-hand side, we write down how much more time we would like to talk about this. So you can write anything on the right-hand side from like 0 through 8, let's say. So in the chat on the right-hand side. You're getting outvoted, Luke. Let's take 3 more minutes to do this. And
wait, sorry, what is this?
Also, hello, Slava. Welcome. Do you want to give us a quick intro on who you are and why you're interested in cryptoeconomic primitives?
Yeah, sure. My name is Slava. So I'm working on a decentralized news sharing platform. And so it's like a curation platform. And so we're working on 2 main protocols to support it. One is a reputation protocol, and one is an incentive protocol. So the reputation, we're building out a system where all the users can basically get reputation that indicates authority on a given subject. So it's per topic. And we're looking at TCRs to create a Sybil-resistant reputation system. Where you indicate the initial set of trusted authorities set, and then we can then propagate, like using algorithms like eigentrust, we can propagate it through the entire network. So that's where we're interested in TCR and potentially modifying it a little bit to use then the resulting reputation system, maybe in combination with token voting. And then the other aspect is distributing rewards to authors, to quality curators. So that element is kind of close. We're thinking about the same kind of things that Simon is thinking about in the latest update to the curation markets, where there's like a reward pool and rewards are being distributed to people that are either commenting or voting. So thinking about how to do that effectively.
Cool. That makes sense. And just as a note, I think it'd be good. Can you turn off your camera? Just for yep, the other one. Nice work. Thank you. And I guess I just want to check in Moisha and Moshe and Slava. Sorry, I keep on failing at it. Do you guys have thoughts on this? We're gonna take 4 more minutes on this defining of cryptoeconomic primitives card in topic. Do you guys have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would just build on what we're saying about these are all building blocks. And at the very base layer, I don't think we have that many. You know, the way I see cryptoeconomic primitives is, you know, you're incentivizing someone to take an early economic loss so you can motivate them to recover that loss and maybe profit from it down the line. So at the very base level, we have, you know, proof of work, which is an economic loss in terms of work done. We have proof of stake. And then on top of that, we have things that we can build, such as TCRs. But I would say that TCRs are sort of a construct on top of a proof of stake primitive.
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting framing there, and that might get at this thing when I did this interview with Trent McConaughey from Ocean recently around the proof, like that TCRs and in cryptoeconomic primitives and prediction markets are all kind of ways to bet on the future in a way, while something like proof of X, whatever that proof might be, is kind of a proving that you did something in the past to get rewards. Is that kind of aligned with what you're saying, Moshe?
Yeah, and I would say that where TCRs are also sort of sitting on top of the general oracle idea. So I think a TCR is essentially a binary oracle, where you're reporting on a binary kind of property of something. But in general, I would say that it's just one example of an oracle, which is, you know, a pretty commonly used mechanism.
And then Slava, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, what I've been thinking about a lot is, and maybe that's kind of veering towards the other topic, is kind of limitations of these systems, and kind of, because I think it also relates to this governance, like on-chain governance conversation that's been going on. So I'm just curious where, like what I'm interested in is thinking about where these systems work really well, in what circumstances and where they break down. I'm not sure if that falls under or economic primitives, but.
Well, I think it's very related. And I guess, Luke, do you have any thoughts on that? Because you're especially at this intersection of governance and cryptoeconomic primitives.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that we really require a lot of experimentation to understand exactly how some of these these models that we're kind of designing and examining with TCRs or with on-chain governance or with any sort of governance model, really, and how they actually act in the real world as opposed to in kind of the models in our head, because the real world's very messy, and you've got conflicting incentives that aren't necessarily accounted for in your models. One of the interesting conversations that I think was in the previous call yesterday was about like the necessary economy size for TCR to be viable, because you are adding transaction costs for this coordination and participation of the community, and you can't just make a list for like a shopping list, for example, and crowdsource that. It's just too small of a problem, and there's no reason to do it. So figuring out exactly where each of these like building blocks or these models that we're talking about work, and where they don't, like what's the best application for like a TCR or some other governance mechanism or some specific Oracle design, is going to be really interesting. And I think a lot of that's just going to be through experimentation that we discover.
So that's kind of a classically held belief in this ecosystem, which is like, hey, you can't know the outcomes of the system until the system is live. And it's like, hey, if you define it in a white paper, if you write a Medium post about it, or if you even if you put it on the test net or whatever, that you can't test it. But I would love to, if possible, for us to push, and we talked about this yesterday, ways that we can push forward the experimentation of these things without necessarily needing to put them live on the main net with auditing and security and all those things. Are there ways that we can kind of MVP these systems?
Yeah, so one of the things I'm really excited about is the idea of like using carbon vote and signaling mechanisms to basically simulate on-chain governance using kind of off-chain coordination. So, for example, in Vitalik's recent post on governance, he talks about kind of a multifactorial approach to signal inputs and trying to get signals from like validators and token holders and developers and all of these people that currently like only exist off chain. But you could create different tokens that aren't just ETH that represent those different constituencies. And you could use carbon vote signaling to get feedback from them and kind of see on chain what they're voting for. And you can also add things like delegation or add things like futarchy into that. So an interesting experiment in my mind would be to take some of these mechanisms that we're looking at and and just have some way to wrap ETH into like a token that can be isolated, like a one-to-one peg or like a sidechain type thing, and plug it into these like signaling mechanisms, and see what the results are. And if you get good results from that, those signals will start to be taken seriously. So like you don't necessarily need to change any of our current processes to actually implement these things. You can just have, if you want to try liquid democracy as a signaling mechanism, you can create the structure for that. It doesn't need to be tied to a concrete decision or protocol change. But if enough people start using it, it gets the mind share, the coordination off chain that's already happening will kind of converge towards that system if it's working well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and just to check, do you know the WETH implementation by 0x and Radar?
Yeah, so the WETH thing is just for ERC20 support,
yep.
Which is pretty cool. I think some of the interesting voting mechanisms and signaling mechanisms require more functionality, like ERC223 or like the mini-me standard for tokens. So I think there might be multiple wrapped ETH implementations, and it may be one of those things where you want to have an isolated wrapped ETH token for a specific signaling app, so you can understand who's participating. Like you get the denominator as well, in terms of like looking at quorum and stuff like that. But definitely wrapping Ether and then using that for signaling is really interesting from a governance or protocol governance perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that. You can, if you wrap Ether, now you have an ERC20 token that you could make a market with immediately, instantly, on demand, create a pool, and then redeem from it. So it's really powerful. And I think the wrapped ETH code initially was created by MakerDAO. So you might look there if you want to see it. But I think basically it's this ERC20 interface on top of Ether.
So I have a bit of a question. I agree it's very interesting to do this in a wrapped ETH token, but since the process, well, I'm just wondering, is that the right way to perform a simulation, a low-cost simulation, if the processes and the primitives are still in flux? Would there be a more easy way to do a macroeconomic simulation of where you can plug in primitives and specific agents and strategies in order to not have to rely on a select user base for these kind of experiments to interact with, just to do some more rapid prototyping? I don't know if that's the actual question of Rice, but
yeah, I think the key is rapid prototyping, and I think that's what Luke is getting at, and I totally agree with that. But you also need skin in the game, so either somebody has to centrally manage a spreadsheet and redeem real value there, or use a real thin layer on the blockchain with wrapped Ether, and then do everything else off chain. And then your prototype would be off chain. It would be really agile. You could use any technology you wanted. You could even use Google Sheets or something like that, Carbon Vote. But I think you have to have skin in the game in order to really understand the true behavior of the crowd.
Yeah, so I think that at a high level, I mean, and when I think about next steps here, and let's try to do this, the actual specific next steps with respect to this defining cryptoeconomic primitives card. And I'd love to hear, so I'm going to try to define some, and then I'd love to hear you guys take on what the next steps should be. So the first is, I feel like from this MVP perspective that talking with, so a top one is, I heard that Robin Hansen did a lot of these prediction market tests, a few Tarky tests, it kind of with, in like from a social sciences perspective. And so I think that would be one good way to MVP this. So I'll hit up Robin. The other thing here is, yes, starting to experiment with some of these wrapped ETH implementations with Carbon Vote to do some of this, to do some of this like kind of spin up voting systems. So those are kind of on the MVP side. And then on the non-MVP side, I think that essentially crowdsourcing some article around the cryptoeconomic primitive stack, and that would look similar to some of the stack articles that already exist, but it would be specifically, it would be more game of 4E, it would be more a pattern languagey, and it would try to define things like Merkle trees, where they fall compared to oracles, where they fall compared to proof of work, proof of stake, where they fall compared to TCR's curation markets. So those are kind of the three big, there's the MVP side, I guess, and then there's the stack side, cryptoeconomic primitive side. Do you guys see, do those seem like good next steps, or any other top next steps that you guys could see? Sounds like a moderate either success or failure. Okay, cool.
Well, maybe just how difficult would it be to put on a little sandbox implementation of a simple TCR? I think people could here in the call could do that in a few days. No, I'm just guessing. I'm just trying to see what's the effort required.
On chain or off chain?
If you can give me values for both, then maybe I can.
Yeah, I think that's something we should try to do, is figure out how, like Luke said, figure out how to rapidly prototype off-chain using existing tools such as Carbon Vote or Google Sheets, or even, you know, JavaScript, and maybe we can have another call or a round table about how to prototype.
I think that it sounds like, I mean, if I were to, I don't know what the estimate would be for a on-chain, for like, I mean, if you're trying to do an on-chain, oh, sweet, Morgan has an on-chain demo running, and it took 4 days. So that, Morgan, do you want to tell us what does that demo, what is that TCR curating around?
Yeah, 1 second. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, it's not curating around anything. So it's really a demo. Basically, you can ask a question, and the answer is yes or no, which sort of is to say, you know, whether. In a way, it's not really a TCR, but it's basically you can submit some text, and it can be marked as included or not included. To run a proper experiment, you'd want to change the interface a little bit so that it was maybe asking a different question, and maybe so that it was filtering no's out of the whitelist. But I just threw that up there because I did that for Hackathon quickly a couple of weeks ago, and it wasn't really that hard to get something basic up and running.
Cool. So I think I'll follow up after this, but it sounds like there will be having some kind of there's that one, there's the Mike Golden, like, I mean, there's lots of various TCR implementations that are popping up, and I think that if there's one that is an on-chain, so one of the possible MVPs is an actual on-chain one where we're asking some kind of probably funny question with moderate skin in the game, but not intense skin in the game, to start testing this. So let's move on to this next question here, which is around the fundamental building blocks of TCRs. And this is kind of, I see this as, I guess this is not my card, this is Doug's card. So Doug, do you want to give it an intro, and we'll take
yeah, it's pretty simple. I think it's a good segue from what we were just talking about. This is more specific to, you know, what are the components and the building blocks of token curated registries, and how can they be combined, or where are the layers in the stack, or what are the patterns that we're using. So, for instance, there's a market maker, there's a bonding mechanism, there may be a bonding curve, and I think Luke can speak more on this, but essentially it's more of a focus on the building blocks and pattern language around, specifically around token curated registries.
I tried to summarize a few of these things in that little blog post about stake machines. So maybe that could help us, and we could definitely not but at least maybe as a guidance. Just as a reference, Doug, I don't know if you managed to have the link or something.
I posted it in the chat on the right-hand side.
So at some point, I think midway, I do a bit of an effort on looking at what are the. I have a few schemas just showing the mechanism. I think visual aids are always very helpful at this stage. So one is just a simple TCR, and then we go into labeled TCRs, and then we go down into more rules-based TCRs. But don't mind. I think we have tokens. Stake as is it's basically a measure of opinion, limited opinion. Maybe tribes, community groups that signal with each other. So signaling would be something. I also think you have proposals and challenges, but you could also invert them when you put forward a challenge and then a proposal as a solution, and then you get more the bounty solution paradigm rather than voting in or out of the whitelist. So if this is helpful, I gave it one shot, but I'm sure it's probably not covering the bonding curves. It's not covering a lot of the other curation market stuff. But if we can define these little entities, actors, agents, and actions in between them, then I think we might be able to build up more complex primitives.
Yeah, my instinct for I was about to say something similar to your ending statement there, Dimi, which is making sure that we're aware of the one bucket is like the noun bucket or the object bucket, which are the entities, the actors, and the agents, and that's something like individuals or communities of individuals or what have you. And then there's kind of the action side, the verbs, the ing, or in English or whatever, which is the what are the actions that people can take, and that's more on like the proposals and challenges side, or the reverse of it on like the bounty side. So I would definitely want to kind of bucket it at a highest level, but that would be probably my highest level bucket there.
I think that distinction between like who is acting and how they are acting is a good way to think about and organize these things. When I saw fundamental building blocks of TCRs on the list, I thought specifically that we were talking about the TCR implementation, like that the like ad chain version of a TCR or Mike Golden's version of TCR. And I think from a language perspective, it's kind of confusing because that's one very specific mechanism that includes partial lock, commit, reveal voting. It isn't so concerned about the market mechanism or the bonding curve that you could have a market mechanism or a bonding curve to generate the initial token distribution in a continuous fashion. But the TCR, like the scope of it is really, you have a partial lock, commit, reveal voting so that people can't just look at how other people are voting, like the votes are hidden until they're revealed. And you have deposits associated with listings on the entry, and you have a economy behind what gets listed. Like there's a value proposition for being on the list in the first place, which is what encourages people to actually submit. So that specific definition is, like, I think a very narrow scope. When we talk about token curated registries, I typically think about that because that's what it's called in the paper. But the general idea of a list of items, whether it's an ordered list or an unordered list, that is using tokens as signals to generate that list, like that's a much more abstract version of a token curated registry. And it's very confusing to be like, to have a conversation and not know what we're talking about. Are we talking about curation markets in general? Are we talking about list making in general? Or are we talking about a very specific cryptoeconomic primitive, which is this TCR mechanism that's used for organizing a list with specific cryptoeconomic incentives?
I can agree on all these points, and what I would then propose is maybe, because I also get confused between these two, and I think you're quite spot on with how to create a signaled list and with opinion attached to it. Maybe it would make sense to see if you look at the more general high-level abstraction, and then see how a TCR from my golden paper actually can be implemented with those more generic primitives.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been kind of pushing on the Aragon side, and something that I think we're going to go ahead and do, but I know this is a live stream, so I should be careful with what I say.
Definitely.
But,
we are being transparent, just as a heads up.
Yeah, is the idea that on Aragon Core, we've got this modular approach to kind of governance structures and interoperability between contracts. And the idea of decomposing a TCR or even a generic idea of a TCR into applications. So you'd have like a registry application that could kind of handle the submission, the proposal process, and maybe the deposits. And you've got a voting app, and you could have both a delegative voting app or a partial lock commit reveal voting app, and they can interoperate, and you can kind of compose different types of registries, is really useful. We kind of have the idea of a access control list right now in Aragon Core, which is how permission gets escalated, and you define groups of address specific permissions within the system, and that's just a very specific list. So generalizing that, so it's not just lists of addresses that get access or permissions, but just lists of things, it opens up a lot of use cases for somebody who just wants to spin up a decentralized organization to curate a list. They could do that with just like decomposing those things, and they could set up the incentives how they want.
Yeah, I'm bucketing that into the previous two buckets of the nouns versus verbs or subject object or whatever, or who and how, which is that you have the registry application, which is that's the list itself. Those are kind of, I guess there are two things. There's the people or the bots who are doing the curating, and then there's the thing that they're curating on, and then there's the verb and how they do that. And that sounds like the voting application side with the delegate voting PLCR, and that you'll be able to kind of mix and match any of these in kind of an abstracted way, any of these systems.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's do a quick voting on the side here. Let's say that you can vote between 2 and 4 minutes. So those are your or between 0 and 4. Sorry, 0 and 4. So write a number on the right hand side for how many more minutes you'd like to talk about this. Boom. Let's move on. So I think that let's take maybe 3 minutes to do this Zen of data governance curation of primitives card from Dimi, and then we'll go into pseudo wrap-up mode. So Dimi, do you want to give an overview on that one?
Yes, I would like to do that. What I was thinking was that many of these shelling points, or at least the reason why you're curating the decentralized reward function itself, the governance aspect you're doing, always needs some kind of Zen. You have the Zen of Python. I actually found something really cool that I like a lot, per keep. And it's like principles, tenets. For example, for per keep, this was disk is cheap and getting cheaper. No need to delete in general. Put the user in control on your data, privacy and paranoia, etc. Just like how to specify the signaling message, the governance object, the shelling points. Should this be just like, of course, this is curated itself and evolves over time, but I'm wondering if we can do this from the start, because we're curating something ourselves here. We're curating how to construct from content a concept around TCRs. So I guess we could eat our own dog food here and start thinking about what would be the tenets, what would be the governance aspects of how to make a society like this happen.
Mm-hmm. To check on here, are you The way that I'm hearing what you're saying is something around like, hey, what are the values that are here? What's the societal perspective that we have? And specifically with respect to like us, what are I think the dog fooding thing is likely to happen in the future if these calls get bigger, and it's like, okay, who should be in the call and things like that. We can try all kinds of random TCR and other curation market like things as we go on. But so I guess, Dimi, my question is, are you talking about on that like that value side? Is that kind of what you're looking for here?
Yes, that's exactly it. And how do we apply it ourselves? I get, because when I talk to non-crypto people about these things, then they do give me a lot of input about sociology, psychology, like what's the actual impact on humans, to do this kind of decentralized opinion. So I think it's a very powerful technology, and I hope it doesn't become too powerful. And I'd love to put that.
Yeah, I think that it's incredibly, I love pushing for we got the tech society loop, how tech influences society and society influences tech. And although we're all very excited about the tech side of things, as we should be, we're also, almost all of us said at the beginning, we chat about society and how we want to make this better for society. So I think it is incredibly important for us to be able to, in some kind of decentralized way, define the values and the societal side of this. So I have a lot of thoughts that I've written about this in kind of like this ETH Commons co-op piece, but do other people have thoughts on either the values or how to decide the values, stuff like that?
I don't know if I have too much of an opinion on that per se, but I would say that I think it's really important when focusing on the tech to look at the bigger picture, because tech for tech's sake isn't particularly valuable, but tech that makes the world a better place or changes kind of how we interact in society is incredibly potent. So we don't want to build things just to build them because they're cool. We want to focus on like the actual impacts and how it actually affects things in our everyday life.
Yeah, I think part of that is kind of thinking about different aspects of off-chain governance that could potentially put checks on on-chain governance, and then potentially also like building in other checks. Because for example, one problem that I've been thinking about and that it applies to in general to proof of stake and to the TCR tokens, for example, if you want a way to, and token voting is if you want to fork the system, right? For some reason you're not happy with the way things are going and you want to preserve the balances, you ultimately end up with the same people that have control and have power. So building ways like check systems to mitigate those kinds of problems, I think is a good.
Yeah, I like that framing, and that's kind of in some ways what blockchain is it's a fork and slash an exit from the Exit Voice book around the like society, the current. This is the macro claim about the society that we currently live in or whatever, and this kind of top-down version of things with nation states and whatever. And we are in some weird way maybe building a bottom-up system there. And the question is, as we build this bottom-up system, how can we make it the case that if we, the bottom-up system builders, are being bad and we don't have, how can we make sure that there's good things of exit in there? How can we make sure there's good coevolution happening, things like that? So I definitely agree with all that. The other thing that, I mean, for me, just to kind of bring it back to those other buckets as well, are like, who are the actors that are acting here? And this is just something that I personally push for as well, as like on the kind of inclusion diversity side. It's like we had, I guess, probably 20 people in these two curation or cryptoeconomic primitives meetings, and everyone was a male. And that is indicative of the times, but does not need to be true about the future. So I think about that as well. And it's diversity across all kinds of different spectrum, but that is like the easiest one to see. And then maybe one final note here is I think that this is honestly kind of similar to talking about and kind of trying to break these things down into their subparts. It's like lots of people break, when you're like doing company building, you break things down into like your mission, then your strategy, then your tactics, or you kind of break things down to, within your culture, you have your values, you have your communication patterns, things like that. And so I think that those same patterns will kind of need to be ported over into the kind of more societal side, the more kind of human system side of this. And I think that that'll be an important part. Any final thoughts on this? Nope. Okay, sweet. So let's go into kind of retro modes. I think, well, on that note, well, in terms of next steps for fundamental building blocks of TCRs, I feel like the fundamental building blocks one is not too dissimilar from some of the stack stuff that we talked about before, where we're essentially trying to crowdsource the atomic pieces of these systems, and then specifically with respect to TCRs. And then for this last topic that Dimi brought up around the Zen side, I think that I think at a high level, the first step here is just for all of us to keep in mind how important it is not just to think about the tech, but also to think about society, not just think about the what of what we're talking about, but the who is talking, and things like that. And also to finally just think about the impacts and the things that we want to do in the world. So with that, let's do some retroing. So on the Trello board, I've put a column that says plus and then a column that says delta. And everybody should take a couple minutes to just write on the plus side, hey, things that they thought were good about this meeting. And then on the delta side, say things that you thought were bad, so actually would like to change for the next time. And please, you can be brutal, you can be honest, you can be critical. We're trying to make these things actually valuable. So, and we're going to be experimenting for at least another month. So yeah, on the Trello board, please add things the next kind of 3 or so minutes into the plus side and into the delta side.
Hey, Reese, I just left you a message in the chat.
Okay, nice. By the way, if you want edit permissions, there's this link. Take maybe one more minute. Okay, cool. So yeah, I think that we'll work on some of the the next steps, minutes of the meeting side. One question I just have for people is, how do people feel about the discussion length? In the first meeting, it was very much, and Morgan, you're actually in both, so maybe it'd be helpful to get your thoughts here. The first one was like, hey, we're talking about this for 4 minutes, and maybe we get an extra 2 minutes. In this one, it was like, hey, let's talk about these things for 8, and then we can add in an additional, like 8 if we want or whatever. What were people's thoughts on that? Specifically, Morgan.
I think how much of this one did I miss? I don't know.
I don't know. It started an hour ago.
Oh, we started an hour ago. Okay. I mean, I'd cost the last 10 minutes or 20.
Okay. Well, then I asked the wrong question. Does anybody else have thoughts on in terms of length?
Oh, well, I can respond with regard to the first one. In terms of length, I thought it was quite good in the sense that I think it's actually quite difficult to talk about much other than to like bring up things that should be spoken about at this point, given the maturity of everything. And so I quite liked how we kind of stepped through very quickly. and like identified things to think about later.
Cool.
I watched the first call, like I watched the recording, and I feel like the faster cadence in the first call and covering more topics at a lower level seemed to be more valuable in my opinion. If we wanted to do longer conversations, I think it would be important to identify going in some of the specific topics that we're covering, as opposed to deciding in real time.
Yep. Cool. Well, with that, thank you everybody for this. We will try to make, so in general, everybody first have good holidays. Also, I'll be in touch in 2018 around both the next steps for me specifically, the kind of crowdsourced next steps, and then likely we'll have some kind of meeting in January with project updates and updates around some of the learnings that we had and things like that, and hoping that some of these cryptoeconomic primitive things are valuable and keep happening going forward. So with that, thank you so much, everybody, and goodbye.
Happy holidays.
Thanks
Bye.
for organizing this.
Woo!
Yeah, thanks,
Thank you.
Bryce. Amazing. Ciao.
All right. Happy holidays, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Peace.